The massive chamber of the Galactic Council fell silent as Ambassador Vexthara of the Kellian Empire rose from her crystalline seat. Her forearms trembled slightly as she accessed the holographic display, projecting images that made even the most hardened warriors in the assembly shift uncomfortably. Honored members of the council, her voice echoed through the vast space. I stand before you today to deliver a warning that may save countless lives across our galaxy. A warning about a species that has emerged from the outer rim territories. A species that calls themselves humans. The word hung in the air like a curse. Several council members had heard whispers, fragments of reports from the frontier worlds. But seeing the evidence laid bare before them was different entirely. The first image showed the remains of what had once been the Zephyrian battle fleet. Twisted metal drifted through space, massive warships torn apart not by conventional weapons but by something far more disturbing. The hull plating bore strange markings, deliberate cuts that served no tactical purpose. The Zephyrians were a proud warrior race, Vexthara continued, her voice steady despite the horror of what she was revealing. Their ships were considered among the finest in the galaxy. They had never lost a major engagement in over 3 centuries of warfare. Yet here they are, reduced to scrap metal by a species most of us had never heard of just 5 years ago. Admiral Koroth of the Draconian Federation leaned forward, his scaled features displaying obvious skepticism. Ambassador, while these images are certainly disturbing, we need more than destroyed ships to justify the dramatic tone of your presentation. Every species in this galaxy is engaged in warfare. What makes these humans different? Vexthara's mandibles clicked together in what her species considered a grim smile. What makes them different, Admiral, is not just their capacity for violence, but their relationship with it. Allow me to show you recordings from the Battle of Proxima Drift. The holographic display shifted, showing a massive space station orbiting a dying star. The Proxima Drift station had been a neutral trading post, home to over 2 million beings from dozens of different species. It had been considered one of the safest places in the Outer Rim, protected by ancient treaties and the simple fact that attacking it would bring the wrath of every major power in the galaxy. The hegemony of Kresh decided to claim this station, Vexthara explained as the recording began to play. They brought a fleet of over 200 ships, believing that superior numbers and the threat of civilian casualties would ensure a quick surrender. The recording showed the Kresh fleet approaching the station in a standard intimidation formation. Their ships were sleek and dangerous, bristling with weapons that could crack planets. Any reasonable species would have negotiated or retreated when faced with such overwhelming force, but the humans weren't reasonable. The first sign that something was wrong came when the human vessels responded to the Kresh ultimatum. Instead of the expected surrender or plea for negotiation, a single transmission was broadcast on all frequencies. The voice was calm, almost conversational, with an accent that somehow made the words more chilling. This is Captain Sarah Chen of the Human Colonial Defense Force. You have threatened civilians under our protection. You have 30 seconds to begin withdrawal, or we will demonstrate why that was a mistake. Admiral Koroth snorted. 30 seconds? Against 200 ships? These humans were clearly delusional. Watch, Vexthara said simply. The recording continued. The Kresh commander, General Thaxlor, responded with typical military bluster, demanding immediate surrender and threatening to bombard the station if the humans didn't comply. His transmission was cut off mid-sentence when the human ships opened fire. What followed defied everything the council members thought they knew about space combat. The human vessels moved like nothing they had ever seen, not just fast but unpredictable, as if they were ignoring basic physics. Their weapons weren't the elegant energy beams or precise missiles favored by most species. Instead, they fired crude-looking projectiles that somehow found their targets despite defensive measures that should have made hitting anything impossible. But the truly disturbing part wasn't the efficiency of the human attack. It was the brutality. When a Kresh ship's shields failed, the humans didn't simply destroy it. They disabled it, leaving the crew alive but helpless. When Kresh fighters ejected from damaged vessels, the humans didn't follow the standard protocols of war. They didn't take prisoners or allow rescue operations. They hunted each escape pod individually. By the ancestors, whispered Counselor Ythara of the Centaurian Alliance, her crystalline features flickering with shock. They're not just fighting a battle. They're conducting an extermination. The recording showed human ships pursuing individual escape pods through the asteroid field surrounding the station, their weapons fire precise enough to disable life support. Without killing the occupants immediately, the crash crews were left floating in space, still alive but knowing death was inevitable. The engagement lasted 4 hours, Vexithara reported. When it was over, the crash fleet was completely destroyed. Not a single human ship was lost. But here's what truly sets this species apart from any other we've encountered. She paused the recording and zoomed in on one of the human vessels. Its hull was decorated with symbols, primitive-looking marks painted in what appeared to be different colors. Each mark represents a confirmed kill, she explained. Not just ships destroyed, but individual crew members eliminated. The humans keep score of their enemies' deaths like trophies. And those colors? Each represents a different species they fought. The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. Several council members began speaking at once, their voices creating a cacophony of disbelief and horror. Furthermore, Vexithara continued, raising her voice to restore order. The humans broadcast the entire engagement to every communication relay in the sector. They wanted other species to see what happened to those who threatened their protected territories. She switched to a new image, showing a star chart of the Outer Rim territories. Large sections were now marked in red. In the 3 years since Proxima Drift, 17 different species have tested human resolve. All 17 have either been completely destroyed or forced to abandon their territorial claims. The humans don't negotiate. They don't take prisoners for exchange. They don't follow any of the established conventions of civilized warfare. Admiral Koroth's earlier skepticism had faded, replaced by a growing unease. What are you suggesting, Ambassador? I'm not suggesting anything, Vexithara replied, her 4 eyes fixed on his. I'm stating a fact. We are dealing with a species that views war not as politics by other means, but as an opportunity for genocide. They don't fight to win territory or resources. They fight to ensure that their enemies can never threaten them again. Ever. The massive chamber fell silent once more as the implications of her words sank in. In a galaxy where warfare was common but typically followed certain unspoken rules, the humans represented something entirely new and terrifying. Tomorrow, Vexithara announced, I will present evidence of what happened to those who ignored the lessons of Proxima Drift. I will show you why every military strategist in the galaxy now agrees on one fundamental principle. Never wage war on humans because they show no mercy. The following day, her crystalline form reflecting the chamber's soft lighting as hundreds of delegates settled into their seats. The atmosphere was different now, heavy with anticipation and barely concealed dread. Word of yesterday's presentation had spread throughout the station, and several species had sent additional representatives to witness what promised to be a disturbing revelation. Honored council members, she began, yesterday I showed you the aftermath of human warfare. Today I will explain how this nightmare began, how a species unknown to galactic civilization just 5 years ago became the most feared predators in known space. The holographic display activated, showing a familiar star chart of the Outer Rim territories. But this version was different, showing the region as it existed before the human emergence. Dozens of species maintained territories there, from the militaristic Kresh hegemony to the peaceful trading enclaves of the Vorthon Collective. 5 years ago, the Outer Rim was a stable region. Yes, there were conflicts, but they followed predictable patterns. Territorial disputes were settled through negotiation or limited warfare with clear objectives. Species fought for resources, trade routes, or strategic positions. War had rules, even if they weren't always followed perfectly. She gestured to a small, unremarkable system near the edge of known space. Then the humans arrived from this system, which they called Sol. Our first report suggested they were a typical emerging species, recently achieving faster than light travel, probably looking for new worlds to colonize or trade opportunities. The image shifted to show the first recorded encounter between humans and galactic civilization. A single human vessel, primitive-looking compared to standard galactic designs, had approached a Vorthon trading station called Haven's Rest. The Vorthons were perfect for first contact, Vexithara explained. Peaceful, diplomatic, experienced in dealing with new species. Their records show that the initial meeting went exactly as expected. The humans seemed curious but cautious, eager to learn about galactic civilization and established trade relationships. Admiral Koroth shifted in his seat. This doesn't sound like the beginning of a nightmare, Ambassador. It sounds perfectly normal. Indeed, Admiral. Which is why what happened next was so shocking. The display changed to show communication logs from the Vorthon station. The humans spent 3 weeks at Haven's Rest asking questions, learning languages, studying galactic law and customs. They were particularly interested in territorial boundaries and the rules governing conflicts between species. The logs showed typical exchanges between the human delegation, led by someone identified as Commander Jessica Torres, and the Vorthon administrators. The humans asked about trade regulations, immigration policies, and diplomatic protocols. Nothing seemed unusual. Then, Vexithara continued, the humans asked a question that should have warned the Vorthons about what they were dealing with. A new communication record appeared, showing Commander Torres meeting with Station Administrator Felthara in what appeared to be a standard diplomatic briefing room. The human woman seemed relaxed, even friendly, as she posed her question. "Tell me about the Crimson Syndicate," Torres had asked. "We've heard they operate in this region, preying on weaker colonies and demanding tribute. How does galactic law handle organized piracy?" The Vorthon's response was diplomatically careful, explaining that while the Syndicate's activities were technically illegal, their base in the Tartarus Nebula was too well defended for any single species to assault. Several joint military operations had been discussed over the years, but the cost in lives and ships was considered too high for the potential benefits. The Syndicate has been a problem for decades, Administrator Felthara had explained in the recording. They're not numerous, perhaps 50 ships at most, but they're well armed, and know the nebula's navigation hazards better than anyone. Most species simply pay their tribute and avoid their territory. Commander Torres had nodded thoughtfully. And their leadership? A being called Scarlord Vashtar commands them. He's ruthless but pragmatic. The tribute system works because he's careful not to push anyone too far. He takes enough to maintain his fleet, but not enough to unite the region against him. What happened next puzzled the Vorthons at the time. Commander Torres had thanked them for the information, concluded her diplomatic mission, and departed with her ship. The Vorthons filed their reports and assumed the humans would establish a small colony somewhere in the outer rim, joining the dozens of other minor species trying to carve out their own little corner of space. They were catastrophically wrong. 2 months later, Vexthera announced, the Crimson Syndicate simply vanished. The holographic display showed the Tartarus Nebula, a swirling mass of gas and electromagnetic interference that had sheltered pirates for generations. Long-range sensors detected no life signs, no energy signatures, nothing to indicate that anyone had ever lived there. Investigation teams eventually found the Syndicate's base. Vexithara continued. What they discovered defied explanation. The entire facility had been systematically destroyed, not by bombardment from orbit, but by boarding parties working room by room through the complex. Images appeared showing the remains of the pirate stronghold. The destruction was surgical in its precision, clearly the work of organized military forces rather than random violence. But the details were disturbing. Bodies were found still strapped to chairs in what appeared to be interrogation chambers. Equipment had been carefully dismantled rather than simply destroyed. Records had been downloaded rather than wiped. The most disturbing discovery was in Scarlord Vashtar's personal quarters. Vexithara said, zooming in on a particular section of the facility. The humans had left him alive long enough to extract information about every operation the Syndicate had ever conducted. Every contact they had in legitimate governments. Every corrupt official who had taken their bribes. Counselor Ithera leaned forward, her crystalline features reflecting her growing horror. They weren't just eliminating a pirate threat. They were conducting intelligence gathering. Precisely, and they used that intelligence very effectively. The display shifted to show a timeline of events following the Syndicate's destruction. Within 6 months, corrupt officials on 17 different worlds had been exposed, often through anonymous tips to local authorities. Legitimate businesses that had been paying tribute suddenly found their stolen goods returned, again with anonymous explanations of where to find the rest of their missing property. Admiral Koroth frowned. They were cleaning up the entire region's corruption network. Yes, but that wasn't the end of it. Vexithara's mandibles clicked ominously. You see, the Crimson Syndicate hadn't operated in isolation. They had allies, other criminal organizations that provided support, intelligence, or simply safe harbor when needed. The star chart updated, showing the locations of several other criminal groups throughout the Outer Rim. The humans had extracted the locations of every single allied organization from the Syndicate's records, and they visited each one in turn. What followed was a systematic campaign unlike anything in recorded galactic history. The humans didn't announce their intentions or demand surrenders. They simply appeared at each criminal stronghold, eliminated everyone inside, gathered intelligence, and moved on to the next target. The Bone Reapers, the Shadow Fleet, the Iron Claw Cartel. Vexithara listed each name as their former territories appeared in red on the display. 18 different criminal organizations built up over decades or centuries, erased in less than a year. Each elimination was more efficient than the last, as if the humans were learning from each encounter. The recordings showed the aftermath of each attack. The humans left no survivors among the criminals themselves, but they meticulously documented every crime, every victim, every stolen item. They created comprehensive databases and transmitted copies to every legitimate government in the region. Then they did something that truly demonstrated their nature, Vexithara continued. They tracked down the families of every victim the criminals had ever harmed. Thousands of beings across dozens of worlds received compensation packages, sometimes for crimes committed decades ago. Stolen property was returned, even when the original owners had given up hope of ever seeing it again. The chamber was silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't random violence or simple military conquest. It was justice administered with mechanical precision and absolute ruthlessness. The humans had appointed themselves judge, jury, and executioner for an entire region of space. Admiral Koroth said quietly. They cleaned house with military efficiency and moral authority that no one could argue with. But they didn't stop there, Vexithara warned. Having eliminated organized crime from their chosen territory, they began establishing what they called protected zones around colonies that had suffered the most from pirate raids. They offered protection services to any world that requested them. The display showed the expanding sphere of human influence, growing steadily outward from their original territory. But unlike typical territorial expansion, this wasn't about claiming worlds or resources. The humans seemed interested only in eliminating threats to peaceful civilizations. And that, Vexithara see. The following day, her crystalline form reflecting the chamber's soft lighting as hundreds of delegates settled into their seats. The atmosphere was different now, heavy with anticipation and barely concealed dread. Word of yesterday's presentation had spread throughout the station, and several species had sent additional representatives to witness what promised to be a disturbing revelation. Honored council members, she began. Yesterday I showed you the aftermath of human warfare. Today I will explain how this nightmare began. How a species unknown to galactic civilization just 5 years ago became the most feared predators in known space. The holographic display activated, showing a familiar star chart of the Outer Rim territories. But this version was different, showing the region as it existed before the human emergence. Dozens of species maintained territories there, from the militaristic Kresh hegemony to the peaceful trading enclaves of the Vorthon Collective. 5 years ago, the Outer Rim was a stable region. Yes, there were conflicts, but they followed predictable patterns. Territorial disputes were settled through negotiation or limited warfare with clear objectives. Species fought for resources, trade routes, or strategic positions. War had rules even if they weren't always followed perfectly. She gestured to a small, unremarkable system near the edge of known space. Then the humans arrived from this system, which they called Sol. Our first report suggested they were a typical emerging species, recently achieving faster-than-light travel, probably looking for new worlds to colonize or trade opportunities. The image shifted to show the first recorded encounter between humans and galactic civilization. A single human vessel, primitive-looking compared to standard galactic designs, had approached a Vorthon trading station called Haven's Rest. The Vorthons were perfect for first contact, Vexithara explained. Peaceful, diplomatic, experienced in dealing with new species. Their records show that the initial meeting went exactly as expected. The humans seemed curious but cautious, eager to learn about galactic civilization and establish trade relationships. Admiral Koroth shifted in his seat. This doesn't sound like the beginning of a nightmare, Ambassador. It sounds perfectly normal. Indeed, Admiral, which is why what happened next was so shocking. The display changed to show communication logs from the Vorthon station. The humans spent 3 weeks at Haven's Rest asking questions, learning languages, studying galactic law and customs. They were particularly interested in territorial boundaries and the rules governing conflicts between species. The logs showed typical exchanges between the human delegation, led by someone identified as Commander Jessica Torres, and the Vorthan administrators. The humans asked about trade regulations, immigration policies, and diplomatic protocols. Nothing seemed unusual. Then, Vexthera continued, the humans asked a question that should have warned the Vorthans about what they were dealing with. A new communication record appeared, showing Commander Torres meeting with Station Administrator Felthara in what appeared to be a standard diplomatic briefing room. The human woman seemed relaxed, even friendly, as she posed her question. "Tell me about the Crimson Syndicate," Torres had asked. "We've heard they operate in this region, preying on weaker colonies and demanding tribute. How does galactic law handle organized piracy?" The Vorthan's response was diplomatically careful, explaining that while the Syndicate's activities were technically illegal, their base in the Tartarus Nebula was too well defended for any single species to assault. Several joint military operations had been discussed over the years, but the cost in lives and ships was considered too high for the potential benefits. "The Syndicate has been a problem for decades," Administrator Felthera had explained in the recording. "They're not numerous, perhaps 50 ships at most, but they're well armed and know the nebula's navigation hazards better than anyone. Most species simply pay their tribute and avoid their territory." Commander Torres had nodded thoughtfully. "And their leadership?" "A being called Scarlord Vashtar commands them. He's ruthless but pragmatic. The tribute system works because he's careful not to push anyone too far. He takes enough to maintain his fleet, but not enough to unite the region against him." What happened next puzzled the Vorthans at the time. Commander Torres had thanked them for the information, concluded her diplomatic mission, and departed with her ship. The Vorthans filed their reports and assumed the humans would establish a small colony somewhere in the outer rim, joining the dozens of other minor species trying to carve out their own little corner of space. They were catastrophically wrong. 2 months later, Vexthera announced, the Crimson Syndicate simply vanished. The holographic display showed the Tartarus Nebula, a swirling mass of gas and electromagnetic interference that had sheltered pirates for generations. Long-range sensors detected no life signs, no energy signatures, nothing to indicate that anyone had ever lived there. Investigation teams eventually found the Syndicate's base, Vexthera continued. What they discovered defied explanation. The entire facility had been systematically destroyed, not by bombardment from orbit, but by boarding parties working room by room through the complex. Images appeared showing the remains of the pirate stronghold. The destruction was surgical in its precision, clearly the work of organized military forces rather than random violence. But the details were disturbing. Bodies were found still strapped to chairs in what appeared to be interrogation chambers. Equipment had been carefully dismantled rather than simply destroyed. Records had been downloaded rather than wiped. The most disturbing discovery was in Scarlord Vashtar's personal quarters, Vexthera said, zooming in on a particular section of the facility. The humans had left him alive long enough to extract information about every operation the Syndicate had ever conducted, every contact they had in legitimate governments, every corrupt official who had taken their bribes. Counselor Ithara leaned forward, her crystalline features reflecting her growing horror. They weren't just eliminating a pirate threat. They were conducting intelligence gathering. Precisely, and they used that intelligence very effectively. The display shifted to show a timeline of events following the Syndicate's destruction. Within 6 months, corrupt officials on 17 different worlds had been exposed, often through anonymous tips to local authorities. Legitimate businesses that had been paying tribute suddenly found their stolen goods returned, again with anonymous explanations of where to find the rest of their missing property. Admiral Koroth frowned. They were cleaning up the entire region's corruption network. Yes, but that wasn't the end of it. Vexthera's mandibles clicked ominously. You see, the Crimson Syndicate hadn't operated in isolation. They had allies, other criminal organizations that provided support, intelligence, or simply safe harbor when needed. The star chart updated, showing the locations of several other criminal groups throughout the Outer Rim. The humans had extracted the locations of every single allied organization from the Syndicate's records, and they visited each one in turn. What followed was a systematic campaign unlike anything in recorded galactic history. The humans didn't announce their intentions or demand surrenders. They simply appeared at each criminal stronghold, eliminated everyone inside, gathered intelligence, and moved on to the next target. The Bone Reapers, the Shadow Fleet, the Iron Claw Cartel. Vexthara listed each name as their former territories appeared in red on the display. 18 different criminal organizations built up over decades or centuries, erased in less than a year. Each elimination was more efficient than the last, as if the humans were learning from each encounter. The recordings showed the aftermath of each attack. The humans left no survivors among the criminals themselves, but they meticulously documented every crime, every victim, every stolen item. They created comprehensive databases and transmitted copies to every legitimate government in the region. Then they did something that truly demonstrated their nature, Vexthara continued. They tracked down the families of every victim the criminals had ever harmed. Thousands of beings across dozens of worlds received compensation packages. Sometimes for crimes committed decades ago, stolen property was returned, even when the original owners had given up hope of ever seeing it again. The chamber was silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't random violence or simple military conquest. It was justice administered with mechanical precision and absolute ruthlessness. The humans had appointed themselves judge, jury, and executioner for an entire region of space, Admiral Korath said quietly. They cleaned house with military efficiency and moral authority that no one could argue with. But they didn't stop there, Vexthara warned. Having eliminated organized crime from their chosen territory, they began establishing what they called protected zones around colonies that had suffered the most from pirate raids. They offered protection services to any world that requested them. The display showed the expanding sphere of human influence, growing steadily outward from their original territory. But unlike typical territorial expansion, this wasn't about claiming worlds or resources. The humans seemed interested only in eliminating threats to peaceful civilizations. And that, Vexthara could find it packed beyond capacity. Word of the Kresh annihilation had spread throughout the galaxy, and species that had never shown interest in council proceedings now sent their most senior diplomats. The atmosphere was electric with fear and fascination. Esteemed delegates, she began, yesterday I showed you what happens when a species directly attacks human civilians. Today I will demonstrate something far more disturbing. What happens when species think they can be clever enough to avoid human retaliation while still opposing them? The holographic display activated, showing a star chart of the Outer Rim territories in the aftermath of the Kresh destruction. Large sections now showed as empty space, former Kresh systems that had been systematically sterilized. In the months following the Kresh extinction, the remaining powers in the Outer Rim faced a terrible choice, Vexthara explained. They could accept human dominance and hope for peaceful coexistence, or they could find ways to resist without triggering the same fate that befell the Kresh. She gestured to several star systems highlighted in yellow: the Veltheran Consortium, the Nexus Trade Federation, and the Crimson Dawn Republic chose what they believed was a third option: indirect resistance. The display zoomed in on the Veltheran home system, showing a highly advanced civilization known throughout the galaxy for their technological innovations. Their cities floated in the clouds of gas giants, beautiful structures that represented centuries of scientific achievement. The Veltherans were brilliant scientists and engineers, Vexthara continued. They had no interest in direct military confrontation with anyone, least of all the humans. Instead, they decided to use their technological superiority to level the playing field. A recording appeared, showing a secret meeting of the Valtheron Science Council. The beings in the image were tall and ethereal, their features barely visible through the energy fields that surrounded their bodies. Dr. Zelthara, the chief science director, addressed the assembly with obvious excitement. "My colleagues," she announced, "we have developed something that will change the balance of power in our favor. The humans may be ruthless, but they are still bound by the laws of physics. Their ships, their weapons, their entire military relies on technology we can neutralize." The recording showed her activating a holographic display that demonstrated their creation. A weapon that could disrupt the exotic matter containment systems used in faster-than-light drives. Any ship hit by this weapon would lose its ability to enter hyperspace, effectively stranding it in normal space. With this technology, Dr. Zelthera explained, we can trap human fleets in systems of our choosing, forcing them to fight on our terms. Their advantage in numbers becomes meaningless if they cannot coordinate attacks across multiple systems simultaneously. The plan was elegant in its sophistication. The Veltherans would sell this technology to other species threatened by human expansion, creating a network of systems that could defend themselves by trapping attacking forces. The humans would be contained, forced to negotiate rather than simply overwhelming their opponents with superior numbers. The Veltherans tested their weapon on a human patrol ship, Vexthera reported, a single vessel conducting routine reconnaissance in a neutral system. The weapon worked perfectly, stranding the ship and forcing it to send a distress signal using conventional communication methods. The recording showed the human ship, the UCS Determination, drifting helplessly in space after its hyperspace drive was disabled. The Veltheran test ship approached, presumably to study the effects of their weapon and possibly offer assistance to the stranded humans. The human crew responded to Veltheran communications. Vexthera continued. Captain Lisa Okafor thanked them for their concern and politely requested technical assistance in repairing their drive systems. The exchange was perfectly cordial. Admiral Koroth frowned. That doesn't sound like a typical human response to being attacked. Indeed, Vexthera agreed. The Veltherans were puzzled by the humans' calm reaction. They had expected anger, threats, demands for explanation. Instead, Captain Okafor seemed genuinely grateful for their help and interested in learning about Veltheran technology. The recording showed the next several hours of interaction between the two ships. Veltheran engineers beamed aboard the human vessel to examine the damaged systems. The humans were fascinated by the exotic technology, asking detailed questions about its operation and theoretical foundations. Dr. Silthera, the lead Veltheran engineer, later reported that the humans were remarkably quick learners, Vexthera noted. They grasped complex theoretical concepts with unusual speed and asked surprisingly sophisticated questions about potential applications. After 6 hours of collaboration, the Veltheran engineers successfully repaired the human ship's hyperspace drive. Captain Okafor expressed her sincere gratitude and invited the Veltheran crew to visit human space as honored guests. The encounter ended with both crews exchanging cultural gifts and scientific data. The Veltherans were thrilled, Vexthera reported. They believed they had successfully tested their ultimate weapon while establishing positive diplomatic relations with the humans. Dr. Zelthera declared it a complete success. The display shifted to show Veltheran industrial facilities working at maximum capacity, producing hundreds of the hyperspace disruption weapons for distribution to allied species. Within weeks, 17 different civilizations had purchased the technology and begun installing it on their defensive platforms. Then, Vexthera announced, the humans demonstrated why their reaction to the initial test had been so calm. The timeline jumped forward 3 months, showing the Veltheran home system on what appeared to be a normal day. The floating cities continued their graceful dance through the cloud layers. Scientific experiments proceeded on schedule, and life continued as it had for centuries. At exactly 14:27 local time, Vexthera reported, every piece of Veltheran technology in their home system simply stopped working. The recording showed the catastrophic results. Floating cities that had defied gravity for centuries suddenly found themselves subject to the normal laws of physics. Millions of Veltherans plummeted through the gas giant's atmosphere, their emergency systems failing to activate. Spacecraft fell from orbit like stones. Even basic life support systems shut down across the entire system. The humans had used those 6 hours of repair work to analyze every aspect of Veltheran technology, Vexthera explained. They didn't just understand how the hyperspace disruptor worked. They understood the fundamental principles behind all Veltheran engineering. The display showed human ships emerging from hyperspace at the edge of the system, but they made no aggressive moves. They simply transmitted a single message to the dying civilization below. Dr. Zelthera, came the calm voice of Captain Okafor. This is Captain Lisa Okafor of the UCS Determination. Thank you for the educational opportunity 3 months ago. We learned a great deal about your technology during our time together. We've now applied that knowledge to develop countermeasures for all Veltheran systems. The recording continued with Okafor's explanation. We know you developed weapons specifically designed to strand our ships and disable our military capabilities. We consider this an act of war against human civilization. As with all acts of war against humanity, the response is the complete elimination of your species. But the truly chilling part came next. However, Okafor continued, we recognize that you never actually used these weapons against human civilians. Therefore, we are offering you a choice that we did not offer the Kresh. You may surrender your entire technological base to human control, submit to permanent human oversight of your civilization, and accept the status of a protected but subordinate species, or you may face extinction. Dr. Zelthera's response was transmitted from one of the few functioning emergency shelters on the surface of the gas giant. Her energy field flickered weakly as she spoke, the desperation clear in her voice. We surrender, she said simply. We submit to human authority. Please stop the technological cascade before our entire species dies in the atmospheric depths. The humans accepted the surrender, Vexthara reported, and immediately began rescue operations to save the surviving Veltharans. But the terms of their submission were absolute. The display showed the aftermath. Veltharan survivors relocated to human-controlled facilities, their remaining technology dismantled and studied, their scientific knowledge added to human databases. The species that had once been the galaxy's foremost technological innovators now worked as technicians and researchers under human supervision. But the lesson wasn't over, Vexithara continued. You see, the humans had tracked every sale of the hyperspace disruptor technology. The star chart updated, showing the locations of all 17 species that had purchased Veltharan weapons. One by one, each system experienced the same technological cascade that had crippled the Veltharans. The Nexus Trade Federation, the Crimson Dawn Republic, the Hegemony of Sky. Vexthara listed each name as their territories appeared in red. Every species that had purchased anti-human weapons faced the same choice: surrender and subordination, or extinction. The recording showed the systematic neutralization of each civilization. The humans didn't use overwhelming military force. Accommodate the unprecedented attendance. Representatives from over 300 species now filled every available space, many standing along the walls or floating in designated areas for non-humanoid beings. The air hummed with translation devices working overtime to process dozens of languages simultaneously. Ambassador Vexithara took her position at the central podium, her forearms manipulating the holographic controls with practiced precision. Distinguished delegates, she began. Today I will present the most disturbing evidence yet of human methodology. I will show you what happens to species who believe that neutrality will protect them from human attention. The display activated, showing a detailed map of the Cygnus sector, a region of space known for its diverse collection of peaceful non-aligned worlds. Unlike the militaristic Outer Rim territories, the Cygnus sector had been a haven for species that preferred diplomacy, trade, and scientific advancement over territorial expansion. The Cygnus sector represented everything the galaxy hoped to achieve, Vexithara explained. Dozens of species coexisting peacefully, sharing resources and knowledge, resolving disputes through arbitration rather than warfare. For over 2 centuries, no military conflict had occurred in this region. She highlighted several key systems within the sector: the Ethereal Collective, master philosophers and artists; the Crystalline Archive, living repositories of galactic history; the Garden Worlds of the Symbiotic Alliance, where dozens of species had learned to share planets in perfect ecological harmony. The image shifted to show communications logs from the Cygnus Sector Council, a loose confederation of the region's various governments. As news of human expansion reached them, their response had been exactly what any reasonable civilization would expect. The Cygnus species held emergency sessions to discuss the human situation, Vexithara reported. Their conclusion was unanimous: maintain strict neutrality, avoid any actions that could be interpreted as hostile, and hope that the humans would respect their peaceful nature. A recording appeared showing the final session of the Cygnus Sector Council. Speaker Veltharan of the Ethereal Collective, a being of pure energy contained within a crystalline matrix, addressed the assembly with calm authority. Fellow beings, Veltharan intoned, we have reviewed all available evidence regarding this human species. While their capacity for violence is undeniable, their conflicts have been limited to those who directly threaten their interests. We propose a policy of complete non-involvement. We will not trade with humans, We will not share intelligence about humans with their enemies, and we will not allow human ships to enter our territory. In return, we expect they will leave us in peace. The Council voted unanimously to implement this policy. All Cygnus worlds would close their borders to human contact, not out of hostility but out of caution. They would create a buffer zone around their territory and wait for the human expansion to stabilize before considering any future diplomatic contact. It was a perfectly reasonable approach, Admiral Koroth observed. Complete neutrality with no actions that could be perceived as threatening. Indeed, Vexithara agreed. The Cygnus species did everything possible to avoid conflict. They even went beyond neutrality, actively preventing their citizens from traveling to human space and refusing to purchase goods that might have originated from human worlds. For 18 months, the policy appeared to work perfectly. Human expansion continued in other directions, but no human ships approached Cygnus territory. The buffer zone remained empty of all traffic. The peaceful species continued their philosophical discussions, artistic creations, and scientific research without interference. Then, Vexthera announced, the humans made contact. The recording showed a transmission received simultaneously by every government in the Cygnus sector. The message was brief and delivered by a woman identified as Admiral Sarah Chen, the same officer who had commanded the human response at Proxima Drift. To the leadership of the Cygnus sector species, Admiral Chen said, her voice carrying the now familiar tone of calm authority that preceded human ultimatums. I am Admiral Sarah Chen of the Human Colonial Defense Force. We have been monitoring your region for the past 18 months and have observed your policy of isolation regarding human civilization. The transmission continued with Chen, explaining that humans had noted the Cygnus sector's refusal to engage in any form of contact or trade. We understand that this policy was implemented out of caution rather than hostility. However, we have concerns about the long-term implications of maintaining a completely isolated region so close to expanding human space. What came next stunned the assembled delegates. Chen wasn't demanding tribute or threatening attack. Instead, she was requesting a meeting to discuss mutual concerns about regional stability. The humans wanted to talk, Counselor Rithara said in disbelief. After everything we've seen, they were actually proposing diplomacy. The Cygnus Council was equally surprised, Vexithara confirmed. After intense debate, they agreed to send a delegation to meet with human representatives at a neutral location between their territories. The recording showed the historic meeting taking place aboard a specially constructed space station. The Cygnus delegation included representatives from every major species in their sector, while the humans sent Admiral Chen accompanied by a small diplomatic staff. The negotiations appeared to go well, Vexithara reported. Admiral Chen was polite, professional, and seemed genuinely interested in maintaining peaceful relations. She assured the Cygnus delegates that humans had no territorial ambitions in their region and respected their desire for independence. The formal agreement reached was remarkably fair. The Cygnus sector would remain autonomous, but would allow limited human access for scientific and cultural exchanges. In return, humans would provide protection against external threats and share certain defensive technologies that could help maintain regional stability. It seemed like a diplomatic triumph, Vexthara continued. For the first time since their emergence, humans had negotiated a peaceful settlement with their neighbors. The galaxy watched hopefully, wondering if this might represent a new phase in human expansion. The Cygnus species celebrated the agreement. Cultural exchanges began almost immediately, with human scientists visiting archive worlds and Cygnus philosophers establishing research centers in human space. Trade remained limited but friendly. Several species reported that human visitors were curious, respectful, and genuinely interested in learning about non-human cultures. For 6 months, the arrangement worked perfectly, Vexithara reported. Then the humans revealed the true purpose of their diplomatic initiative. The display shifted to show intelligence reports that had been compiled during those 6 months of cultural exchange. While Cygnus citizens hosted human visitors and shared their knowledge freely, the humans had been conducting the most comprehensive intelligence operation in galactic history. Human scientists had systematically cataloged every piece of technology, Every cultural artifact, every strategic resource in the Cygnus sector, Vexthara explained. Their diplomats had identified key infrastructure, communication networks, and command structures. Their cultural exchanges had been cover for the most thorough military reconnaissance ever conducted. The recordings showed the terrifying scope of human intelligence gathering. They had mapped every defensive installation, identified every ship in the Cygnus fleet, analyzed the psychological profiles of every major leader, and even cataloged the daily routines of civilian populations. But the most disturbing discovery was what the humans had done with this information, Vexthara continued. They had developed detailed plans for the complete subjugation of every Cygnus world, down to the individual city level. The holographic display showed the invasion plans, meticulously detailed documents that outlined how to capture every major population center with minimal resistance. The humans had identified key individuals whose removal would paralyze each government, critical infrastructure whose destruction would cripple defensive capabilities, and cultural sites whose protection would ensure civilian compliance. Admiral Chen summoned the Cygnus Council for a second meeting, Vexthara reported. Her message was different this time. The recording showed Chen addressing the same delegates who had celebrated their diplomatic success 6 months earlier. But her tone had changed from diplomatic courtesy to clinical efficiency. Honored delegates, Chen began, the cultural exchange period has been highly educational for both our peoples. However, we have identified several concerning issues that require immediate resolution. She activated a holographic display showing the strategic analysis human forces had compiled. Your defensive capabilities, while impressive for maintaining internal peace, are inadequate for protecting this region against external threats. Your technological base, while advanced in certain areas, lacks the integration necessary for effective sector-wide coordination. The Cygnus delegates watched in growing horror as Chen systematically dismantled their assumptions about their own security and independence. Most concerning, Chen continued, is your complete lack of preparation for asymmetric threats. Your peaceful nature, while admirable, has left you vulnerable to exploitation by hostile forces who gathering. Representatives from over 400 species filled every conceivable space, with additional delegates participating through quantum communication from across the galaxy. The air itself seemed to vibrate with tension as Ambassador Vexthara prepared to deliver what many considered the most important presentation in galactic history. Esteemed beings of the Galactic Council, she began, her voice carrying across the massive chamber. Today I will present the formal strategic assessment that led to our official warning regarding human expansion. I will show you the mathematical certainty of our conclusion. Coexistence with humanity is impossible under any circumstances. The holographic display activated, showing a comprehensive analysis prepared by the Council's Strategic Threat Assessment Division. The document bore the classification stamps of over 50 intelligence agencies and the approval signatures of the galaxy's most respected military strategists. 6 months ago, Vexthara continued, the Council commissioned the most thorough analysis of human behavior patterns ever undertaken. We gathered intelligence from every surviving encounter, interviewed refugees from human-controlled territory, and analyzed human communications intercepted across dozens of systems. The display showed the staggering scope of the investigation. Intelligence analysts from 300 species had contributed data, creating the most comprehensive threat assessment in galactic history. The final report was over 10,000 pages long and had been reviewed by expert panels representing every major civilization. The conclusion was unanimous, Vexthara announced. Humanity represents an existential threat to every non-human species in the galaxy, not just as military opponents, but as a fundamental incompatibility with the continued existence of galactic civilization. Admiral Koroth leaned forward, his expression grim. Explain what you mean by fundamental incompatibility. Vexthara activated a new section of the display, showing behavioral analysis charts that tracked human responses to various situations. Human psychology differs from every other known species in one critical aspect. They do not recognize the concept of acceptable losses among their own population. The chart showed comparison data from dozens of species, illustrating how different civilizations calculated the costs and benefits of various actions. Every other species showed predictable patterns. They would accept certain levels of risk, casualties, or resource expenditure in exchange for strategic gains. Humans show no such calculation, Vexthara explained. When human civilians are threatened, their response is not proportional to the threat. It is always maximum possible retaliation, regardless of cost to themselves or consequences for galactic stability. The display shifted to show decision matrices used by human leadership during various conflicts. The documents, obtained through intelligence sources that Vexthara did not specify, revealed the terrifying simplicity of human strategic thinking. Here is the actual decision-making process used by human military commanders, she announced. First question, are human lives at risk? If yes, eliminate all threats. If no, evaluate other factors. There are no cost-benefit analyses, no consideration of proportional response, no concern for collateral damage to non-human populations. The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. Several delegates began speaking at once, their voices creating a cacophony of disbelief and horror. Furthermore, Vexthara continued, raising her voice to restore order, humans define threat in ways that make peaceful coexistence impossible. Any species with the capability to harm humans is considered a threat, regardless of intention. Any species that might develop such capability in the future is considered a threat. Any species that simply exists in strategic proximity to human interests is considered a threat. She gestured to a new chart, showing the expanding definition of threats in human strategic doctrine. The Kresh attacked human civilians and were exterminated. The Valthorans developed weapons that could theoretically be used against humans and were enslaved. The Cygnus sector maintained complete neutrality and was subjugated. The pattern is clear. Humans consider the mere existence of independent non-human civilizations to be an unacceptable risk. Counselor Ithara spoke from her position among the Centaurian delegation. Are you suggesting that humans intend to conquer or destroy every species in the galaxy? I'm suggesting something far worse, Vexthara replied. Humans don't intend galactic conquest in any traditional sense. They intend galactic sterilization, followed by recolonization with human populations. They view non-human intelligence as a contamination to be cleansed. The evidence she presented was overwhelming. Human colonies showed consistent patterns. They established themselves in systems previously inhabited by other species, but no trace of the original inhabitants remained. Not enslaved, not relocated, simply gone. Human expansion follows a three-phase pattern, Vexthara explained, showing a timeline of human territorial growth. Phase 1. Intelligence gathering and relationship building. Phase 2. Identification of threats and elimination strategies. Phase 3. Complete replacement of non-human populations with human colonists. The display showed dozens of systems that had followed this exact pattern. Species that had welcomed human contact, traded with human merchants, even formed defensive alliances with human forces, had all eventually been classified as threats and eliminated. The mathematics are inescapable, Vexthara announced. At current expansion rates accounting for their demonstrated ability to coordinate simultaneous operations across hundreds of light years, humans will control the entire galaxy within 50 years. Every species that exists today will be extinct within a century. The strategic assessment had reached a conclusion that no civilization in galactic history had ever faced. They were dealing with a species that could not be negotiated with, could not be deterred, and could not be defeated through conventional means. Based on this analysis, Vexthara continued, the Galactic Council issued Emergency Directive 1. All member species are advised to avoid any contact with human forces under any circumstances. Any approach by human vessels should be treated as an imminent threat, requiring maximum defensive response. The formal directive appeared on the display, bearing the emergency authorization seals of over 200 council members. It was the first time in galactic history that the Council had issued a blanket warning against an entire species. The directive was distributed to every known civilization in the galaxy, Vexthara reported, along with detailed tactical analyses of human capabilities and recommended defensive strategies. But even as the warning was being distributed, it was already too late for some species. The hegemony of Thray received the directive and chose to ignore it, Vexthara announced. The display shifted to show the Thray home system, a collection of massive artificial habitats orbiting a neutron star. The Thray were perhaps the most advanced military power in the galactic core, with defensive technologies that had never been breached in their 3,000-year history. The Thray leadership had reviewed the Council's warning and concluded that it was based on encounters with inferior civilizations. Their rotating habitats were protected by temporal displacement fields that made them effectively invulnerable to conventional attack. Their fleet could manipulate gravity itself as a weapon. They had survived the rise and fall of dozens of galactic empires. General Catharthax of the Thray High Command sent a formal response to the Council. Vexthara reported. A new recording appeared, showing a being whose crystalline exoskeleton reflected light in complex patterns that served as both communication and intimidation display. Honorable Council members, General Catharthax announced, the hegemony of Thray appreciates your concern, but we do not share your assessment of this human threat. Our analysis suggests that you have been intimidated by a species that has simply been fortunate enough to encounter weaker opponents. The General's confidence was absolute. We possess defensive capabilities that these humans have never encountered. Our temporal barriers make us untouchable. Our gravity manipulation technology can destroy entire fleets without requiring direct contact. If these humans approach Thray space, they will discover the difference between conquering primitives and challenging a true galactic power. 3 days later, Vexthara announced, the hegemony of Thray ceased to exist. The recording that followed was brief but conclusive. Long-range sensors showed the Thray system, with its magnificent orbital habitats spinning peacefully around their neutron star. Then, without warning, the neutron star itself began to collapse. The humans had somehow destabilized the neutron star's quantum structure, Vexthara explained. The resulting gravitational cascade destroyed everything in the system within minutes. Billions of years of stellar evolution, reversed by human intervention. 3,000 years of Thray civilization, erased by a weapon that turned their own defensive advantages against them. The recording showed the aftermath, a black hole where the Thray system had once existed, surrounded by debris fields that would drift through space for millions of years. The most advanced defensive civilization in galactic history had been eliminated by a weapon that no one had even known was possible. The humans transmitted a single message after the Thray destruction. Vextha drew an unprecedented audience. The chamber had been reconfigured to accommodate over 600 delegates, with thousands more participating through quantum links from across the galaxy. The atmosphere was thick with dread, as beings from every corner of known space gathered to hear the conclusion of the most important briefing in galactic history. Distinguished members of the galactic community, Vexthara began, her forearms steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to reveal. Today I will show you the current state of our galaxy after 4 years of human expansion. I will demonstrate why the warning against waging war on humans has become the single most important principle governing interstellar relations. The holographic display activated, showing a real-time map of galactic civilization. The image was starkly different from the charts that had opened her presentation 6 days earlier. Vast regions that had once been marked in dozens of colors representing different species now showed only 2 designations: human-controlled territory and human-protected zones. As of this morning, Vexthara announced, humans directly control 47% of all inhabited systems in the galaxy. An additional 31% exist under human protection agreements. The remaining 22% represent species that have not yet encountered human expansion or have successfully avoided human attention. The scope of human dominance was breathtaking. In just 4 years, they had achieved what the greatest galactic empires had failed to accomplish in millennia. But the methods of their success defied all conventional understanding of imperial expansion. Human territory shows unique characteristics, Vexthara explained, zooming in on a section of space that had previously hosted 17 different civilizations. Unlike traditional conquest, where occupied populations are enslaved, relocated, or integrated, human expansion results in complete replacement of non-human populations. The detailed scans showed systems that were now bustling with activity, but every ship, every space station, every planetary settlement was purely human. Archaeological surveys of these worlds revealed traces of previous inhabitants, ruins, artifacts, fossils, but no indication of what had happened to the living populations. We have found no evidence of mass graves, no signs of industrial-scale killing, no indication of how billions of beings simply vanished, Vexithara reported. The humans appear to have developed elimination methods that leave no forensic evidence. Entire species have been erased so completely that future archaeologists might conclude they never existed. Admiral Koroth spoke from his position among the Draconian delegation, his voice barely above a whisper. How is such complete elimination possible without leaving traces? Our xenobiologists have several theories, Vexithara replied. But the most disturbing possibility is that humans have weaponized technologies we don't understand. Quantum dissolution, molecular restructuring, dimensional displacement, concepts that exist in theoretical physics but have never been successfully implemented. The display shifted to show the boundaries between human-controlled space and the rest of the galaxy. Unlike traditional borders defended by military installations, human space was marked by something far more ominous. Absolute silence. No unauthorized ship has ever entered human territory and returned, Vexithara reported. No communication has ever been received from anyone who crossed the border without permission. Long-range sensors detect normal stellar activity, but no signs of the civilizations that once existed there. The implications were clear. Humans had somehow achieved the complete sterilization of their territory, while maintaining the infrastructure necessary for their own expansion. They weren't just conquering worlds. They were erasing all evidence that other species had ever existed there. However, Vexithara continued, the galaxy has learned to adapt to this new reality. Those species that have accepted human protection agreements have discovered that humans can be remarkably benevolent overlords, provided their authority is never questioned. The display showed the protected zones, regions where non-human species continued to exist under human oversight. These areas were marked by prosperity, technological advancement, and complete absence of military conflict. The Vorthon Collective, humanity's first contact, now serves as the administrative center for human-protected trade networks, Vexithara explained. Their population has actually increased under human protection, and their technological development has accelerated beyond anything they achieved independently. Similar success stories appeared across human-protected space. The surviving Veltharans had become the galaxy's foremost experts in applied quantum mechanics, working under human supervision to develop technologies that benefited both species. The Cygnus sector philosophers had found human audiences fascinated by their cultural insights, leading to unprecedented cross-species intellectual exchange. The pattern is consistent, Vexithara noted. Species that submit completely to human authority and pose no possible threat are treated with genuine care and respect. Their cultures are preserved, their populations protected, their unique capabilities utilized for mutual benefit. But the terms of this protection were absolute and non-negotiable. The protection agreements require total transparency, Vexithara explained, showing excerpts from actual contracts. Human observers monitor all government decisions, all military activities, all technological development, and all external communications. Protected species may govern themselves in matters of local concern, but any action that could potentially affect human interests requires prior approval. The contracts also included clauses that chilled every delegate in the chamber. Any attempt to develop weapons, form military alliances, or establish communication with non-protected species would result in immediate termination of the protection agreement. The consequences of such termination were clearly stated: complete elimination of the offending species. Yet, Vexithara continued, species operating under these agreements report high levels of satisfaction with their circumstances. Crime rates have plummeted, resource conflicts have been eliminated, and technological advancement has accelerated dramatically. The reason for this satisfaction was simple. Humans had solved the fundamental problems that plagued galactic civilization. With their overwhelming military superiority established, they could guarantee absolute peace and security for those under their protection. Resources were distributed efficiently based on need rather than military power. Scientific knowledge was shared freely among all protected species. The humans have created a galactic utopia, Counselor Ithera observed, for those willing to accept complete subjugation. Indeed, Vexithara agreed. And this brings us to the current situation facing every species in this chamber. The display shifted to show projections of human expansion over the next decade. Based on current rates of growth and demonstrated capabilities, human influence would reach every inhabited system within 15 years. Every species in the galaxy will soon face the same choice that has confronted hundreds of civilizations over the past 4 years, Vexthara announced. Submit to human authority and accept protected status, or resist and face extinction. But the choice was being made easier by the complete absence of successful resistance examples. Not a single species that had chosen to fight the humans had survived to tell their story. The warnings issued by the Galactic Council had proven to be entirely accurate. Humans showed no mercy to those who opposed them. Recent intelligence suggests that humans are preparing for the final phase of their expansion, Vexthara reported. Long-range sensors have detected massive fleet movements in human space, far larger than anything required for their current operations. The implications were clear. Humans were preparing to complete their conquest of the galaxy. Every remaining independent civilization would soon receive the same ultimatum that had preceded every human expansion: submit or be eliminated. The Galactic Council has prepared one final directive, Vexthara announced. The official document appeared on the display, bearing emergency authorization from every surviving member. Government Emergency Directive 3. All member species are advised to begin immediate negotiations for protection agreements with human representatives. Resistance to human expansion has proven universally fatal. Cooperation offers the only possibility for species survival. The directive included detailed instructions for contacting human diplomatic channels and templates for surrender negotiations. It was the first time in galactic history that the Council had officially recommended unconditional surrender to a conquering power. But for those species still contemplating resistance, Vexthara continued, I will share one final piece of intelligence that should eliminate any remaining doubt about the wisdom of such action. The display showed recent deep space observations of human industrial capability. The images revealed construction projects on a scale that defied comprehension. Artificial structures larger than star systems, manufacturing complexes that could produce entire fleets in a matter of days, energy collectors that could harness the output of entire stellar clusters. Human civilization is not limited to the worlds they have conquered, Vexthara explained. They have been building infrastructure in deep space far from any inhabited systems. Their